Somewhere in China, more than 2,000 years ago, a man is said to have looked at an entire mountain standing between his village and the road to the next town and decided quite calmly to move it. Not blow it up, not tunnel through it. Move it stone by stone, basket by basket, for the rest of his life, and if necessary, for the lives of his children after him. When his neighbors laughed at him, asking how one old man could possibly clear a mountain, he is said to have answered that the mountain could not grow any bigger, but his family could keep growing, generation after generation, for as long as it took. That story isn't really about a mountain. It's about something far more uncomfortable, the question of what you do when the thing you want most in life is too large to be finished in a single lifetime, and it connects to a phrase that has echoed through Chinese thought for over 2,000 years, often attributed to a teacher who never once claimed to be a prophet, a mystic, or a genius. The man who moves a mountain begins by carrying away small stones. It sounds almost too obvious to be philosophy. Of course, big things are made of small things. Everyone knows that. But here's the uncomfortable part. Knowing it and actually living as if it were true turn out to be two entirely different disciplines, because somewhere between knowing and doing sits the exact reason most ambitions quietly die. Stay with me. By the end of this, the smallest thing you do today might start to look a lot more important. To understand where this idea comes from, we need to meet the man behind it. Not the marble statue, not the fortune cookie caricature, but Confucius, born around 551 before Common Era in the small state of Lu, in a China that history now remembers as the spring and autumn period. It was an era every bit as violent and unstable as the one that would produce Laozi's philosophy of stillness a generation or two earlier. Feudal states clawing at each other, old rituals collapsing, a political order rotting from the throne down. Confucius, the Latinized name Jesuit missionaries would give him centuries later, was not born into privilege. His father, a minor military officer, died when Confucius was only a toddler, leaving the family in genteel poverty. He worked, by his own account, at menial jobs in his youth, managing granaries, tending livestock, before slowly building a reputation as a scholar of ritual, history, and music. And here is the detail almost nobody expects. By the standards of his own time, Confucius was largely a failure. He spent years wandering from state to state, trying to convince one ruler after another to adopt his vision of ethical governance. Almost none of them listened. He was ridiculed, ignored, at one point reportedly stranded and starving with his students between two hostile states. He died, by most accounts, believing his life's project had not succeeded. What he left behind instead was not a kingdom, not a law code, not a monument. It was a small collection of his conversations, compiled by his students after his death, that we now call the Analects. Fragments, really, brief exchanges and observations, almost nothing like the grand philosophical treatises being written elsewhere in the ancient world. And buried inside those fragments is one of the most quietly radical ideas in the history of ethics, that greatness is not a talent you either have or don't. It is a residue left behind by an enormous number of small, unremarkable choices, repeated for a very long time. There's a passage in the Analects, Book 9 if you want to look it up, where Confucius uses an image strikingly close to the mountain proverb that later generations would build around his name. He says that building a mountain of earth is like this: if even one basketful of soil from completion, a man stops, the work has stopped entirely because of him. And leveling the ground is the same in reverse. Even if only one basketful has been poured, if a man keeps going, the progress belongs entirely to him too. Read that twice, because it's doing something clever. Confucius isn't praising the size of the mountain. He's placing the entire moral weight of the project on the single basket in your hands right now. Not the mountain 1,000 baskets from now. Not the mountain you'll never live to see finished. This basket, this moment, the responsibility for the whole mountain he's suggesting was never really about the mountain at all. It was about whether you show up for the part of it in front of you today. This is the philosophical engine behind the concept the Analects returns to again and again. Shui, usually translated simply as learning, but meaning something closer to continuous self-cultivation, a lifelong, almost obsessive process of small refinements. Confucius describes himself late in life with a kind of quiet honesty rare in ancient texts. At 15, he says, he set his heart on learning. At 30, he found his footing. At 40, he stopped being confused. It isn't until 70 that he claims to be able to follow his heart's desire without overstepping what is right. Notice the timeline. Not a sudden enlightenment, not a single transformative event, a slow, decades-long accumulation, one basket at a time, until an entire mountain of character had quietly been moved. Confucius had a word for the finished version of that project, the person who had, through decades of small, deliberate practice, become genuinely good. He called this person the junzi, often translated as gentleman or exemplary person, though neither quite captures it. The junzi wasn't born noble. In one of the most quietly revolutionary moves in ancient philosophy, Confucius insisted the term had nothing to do with bloodline at all. It was earned basket by basket through the cultivation of a virtue he called ren, usually translated as benevolence or humaneness, expressed through lai, the countless small rituals and courtesies of daily life. How you greet an elder, how you speak to a servant, how you conduct yourself when no one of consequence is watching. This is where the philosophy becomes almost uncomfortably practical. Confucius was not interested in grand gestures of virtue. He distrusted people who talked eloquently about being good far more than people who quietly, consistently were good. There's a line in the Analects where he says he is troubled by 4 things: failing to cultivate virtue, failing to examine what he has learned, being unable to move toward what he knows to be right, and being unable to correct what is not good in himself. Notice that none of these are about achieving something enormous. Every single one is about the daily discipline of showing up honestly to your own imperfections and doing something small about them. Compare this, for a moment, to the philosophy we explored in a previous episode, Laozi's Tao, with its emphasis on effortless alignment, Wu Wei, flowing with the current of nature rather than straining against it. Confucius and Laozi were near contemporaries, responding to the exact same collapsing world, and they arrived at strikingly different prescriptions. Where Laozi urged surrender to a natural rhythm already present in the universe, Confucius urged deliberate, structured, repeated effort to build a rhythm that does not occur naturally at all, the rhythm of ritual, education, and ethical habit. One philosophy says, stop forcing and let the mountain move itself. The other says, the mountain will never move itself. Pick up the basket. Both, in their own way, are answers to the same terrifying question. What do you do when the world around you is falling apart, and you, one person, cannot fix it? Here's the part of this story that should genuinely unsettle you, because it exposes something most of us quietly avoid admitting to ourselves. Confucius, by his own account, never finished his mountain. He never saw his ethical vision adopted by a single ruling state during his lifetime. He died, most historians agree, believing himself a failure. And yet nearly every dynasty that followed him for the next 2,000 years would eventually build its entire civil service, its educational examinations, its concept of moral leadership on the foundation of his teaching. The mountain got moved, He simply wasn't alive to see it. This is the paradox sitting at the heart of any philosophy of patience and persistence. The basket you carry today may never be rewarded with a view of the finished mountain. And modern psychology has spent the last several decades quietly confirming why so many people abandon the baskets entirely once they realize this. A researcher named Teresa Amabile, studying workplace motivation at Harvard, tracked the daily diary entries of hundreds of professionals across dozens of projects and found something she called the progress principle. Of all the things that predicted whether someone felt genuinely motivated and fulfilled on a given day, the single strongest factor wasn't recognition or money or even the size of the achievement. It was whether they had made any forward progress at all that day, even something modest, even something nobody else would notice. Small wins, it turns out, aren't a consolation prize on the way to a big win. They are, biologically and psychologically, the actual fuel. There's a darker mirror to this finding too. Behavioral scientists studying goal abandonment have repeatedly identified something called the what the hell effect. The moment someone misses a single day of a habit, decides the whole project is already ruined, and abandons the entire mountain because one basket got dropped. Confucius, 25 centuries earlier, seemed to already understand this trap perfectly. He never asked his students to be perfect. He asked them to notice their faults and correct them, implying, quietly but unmistakably, that faltering was expected. The philosophy was never about flawless execution. It was about never letting a dropped basket become a reason to put down every basket after it. Modern research on habit formation lines up with the Analects almost eerily well. Studies on behavior change consistently find that the people who successfully build lasting habits, exercise, learning a language, saving money, are rarely the ones who rely on bursts of motivation or dramatic willpower. They're the ones who make the individual unit of effort so small it becomes almost impossible to refuse. Researchers in behavioral design sometimes call this the tiny habits approach. Rather than committing to an hour of exercise, commit to a single push-up. The basket, not the mountain. Because willpower, it turns out, behaves less like an unlimited resource and more like a muscle that fatigues with overuse across a single day, which is precisely why grand, sweeping resolutions collapse by the third week of January, while small, repeated actions, compounding quietly and invisibly, are the ones still standing a decade later. There's an economic version of the same idea too, sometimes called the compound effect. A process where small, consistent improvements, invisible in any single instance, produce results so large over time that they look, in retrospect, almost magical. British cycling's famous turnaround in the early 2000s is a well-documented modern example, a team that went from decades of mediocrity to Olympic dominance, not through one revolutionary training method, but through a coach who broke the entire sport down into 100 small components and improved each one by a fraction of a percent. No single change moved the mountain. The accumulation did. This is, in a sense, the entire moral architecture of Confucian ethics, rediscovered independently by 21st century sports scientists and behavioral economists, arriving at the same basket, the same mound of earth, the same quiet insistence that the person who stops one step from the summit has, in every meaningful sense, stopped at the very beginning. It's worth pausing here to correct a misunderstanding, because patience, in the Confucian sense, gets mistaken constantly for passivity, for simply waiting things out, enduring, letting time do the work. That is not what Confucius is describing. And it's worth being precise about the difference, the same way we had to be precise about Wu Wei not meaning laziness. Confucian patience is not the patience of someone standing still. It is the patience of someone who has accepted that the timeline is longer than they are comfortable with, and who keeps working inside that discomfort anyway. There's a telling exchange in the Analects where a disciple asks Confucius about government, and Confucius answers with three priorities: enough food, enough weapons, and the trust of the people. Pressed on which to sacrifice first if forced to choose, he says, weapons, then food, but never trust, because a state without trust cannot stand at all. Trust, in his framework, cannot be manufactured quickly. It has to be built the way the mound of earth is built, basket after basket, over years, through consistent, unspectacular reliability. You cannot rush your way into being trusted any more than you can rush your way into becoming wise. Both are mountains. Both are moved the same way. This is also, quietly, a rebuke of the very impatience that defined the political chaos of Confucius's own era. Rulers seizing power through sudden force, alliances built through fear rather than years of demonstrated integrity, kingdoms that rose in a single violent season and collapsed just as quickly. Confucius watched an entire civilization try to shortcut the mountain, generation after generation, and concluded that the shortcuts were the actual reason everything kept collapsing. What is built quickly, by force, tends to fall apart quickly too. What is built basket by basket tends to still be standing when everyone who built it is gone. Which brings us back to the old man from the opening story, the one who set out to move a mountain with a woven basket and a lifetime he knew was too short for the job. That story, sometimes called The Foolish Old Man Who Removed the Mountains, isn't originally Confucian at all. It appears in a later Taoist collection, but it captures the same spirit that runs underneath the Analects, and it's worth noticing why. The old man wasn't foolish because he misunderstood the size of the mountain. He understood it perfectly. He was choosing to measure his life not by whether he would personally witness the mountain's removal, but by whether he was the kind of person who carried baskets anyway. This is, in the end, the quiet, almost unbearable honesty at the center of Confucius's entire philosophy. He never promised his students they would see the mountain gone. He died without seeing it himself. What he offered instead was a different definition of a life well spent, not one measured by the summit reached, but by the consistency of the hand that kept reaching for the next stone long after applause, recognition, or even hope of success had left the room. Somewhere between the ancient mound of earth in Book 9 of the Analects and the tiny habit you're avoiding building today, the same quiet law is operating. The mountain was never moved by the person who could see the whole mountain clearly and felt overwhelmed by it. It was moved by the person who stopped looking at the mountain at all and looked instead at the single stone already in their hands. So here's the question I'd like you to sit with and maybe answer honestly in the comments below. What is the mountain in your life that you've stopped working on? Not because it was impossible, but because you couldn't see the whole thing get finished. And what would change if you stopped needing to see the finish and simply picked the basket back up?